Oh, hi there. The reason I'm dressed up is because it's a special occasion. I'm reviewing the North Arm Knives Skaha, a very sought after and very hyped pocket knife. The actual reason I'm dressed up is because it's about 46 degrees today and my kids made me this tie-dye singlet. So yeah, now it's on the internet and around forever in cyberspace. On with the review. Right, so the Skaha is a knife that I think falls into that pure EDC category. It sits nicely with the Spidey chef or like the Chaparral, things like that. They're just knives made to do your basic day-to-day things. The knife that you pull out of your pocket when you're in the kitchen and your utility knives in the dishwasher or whatever, do those odd jobs, open your boxes, just the basic stuff. And you know, of course, also appealing to knife nerds and going for the stuff that we all like and perhaps don't need in our pocket knives. This has everything you need in a pocket knife, I think. A nice thin blade, a good lock, a pocket clip, you know, decent construction. This has all the extra stuff that you want, like, you know, a flipper, radius, G10 handles, all that good stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the place it's going, I think. It's got G10, a wire pocket clip, ball bearing flipper system, liner lock, S35 VN flat ground steel on its blade, which is very, very thin. Second only to, again, bringing out the Chaparral in terms of probably my thinner blades that I have presently. Maybe the Almar Falcon also tops it as well. So yeah, it's definitely going for pure EDC. As such, it's a quite competitive field, and this is going to be a knife that you're going to buy because you've already got other knives, and you're buying it because you've heard it's good, because there's a wait list for these. So if you actually need a knife, you're obviously not going to be buying a knife with a wait list. You're going to, I mean, at the most, you're going to buy maybe a cheaper knife and then wait for this one, but you're probably just a person like me who has heard these are good, wants something else to have in your pocket from time to time. So you think, well, I'll pick up one of those Skahas that everyone's talking about. So yeah, this review, I'm going to cover everything about it that I can think to cover. I'll answer some questions I've had on the Instagram about it. And yeah, I'll talk about the main point I have with it that would probably stop me from buying this knife. So by all means, stand by for all the info. It's a really good knife, it is. And what they generally are saying is true. But yeah, this will be my take on the North Arm Knives Skaha version 2, apparently. Alrighty, some size comparisons. This is next to an Ontario Rat 1 in D2. It's got my buddy Dave, who's also the lender of this knife, got his angles and grit on there for when I cut test it. He's a very adept sharpener, it turns out, so I'm really interested to see what this one does. But anyway, if you make those go end to end, you see there's about an inch extra on the Rat 1 overall. Looking next to the Spyderco Para 3. If you straightened this Para 3 out, it would probably be a similar size. The Para 3's kind of got a bit of a bend to it, or it feels like it does anyway. So that's that. The thing about the Para 3 is much, much thicker blade. Okay. Much, much thinner blade. The Spyderco Chaparral, much smaller knife again overall. Probably, if this is a bit big for you, then the Chaparral probably aims to do about the same thing as this one does, just being a pure EDC knife, and it's an excellent, excellent choice, especially this FRN version. But you see that really little thin blade there actually makes this one look like it's on the thicker side, so really, really good stuff there too. My favorite knife, the Spyderco Spidey Chef. It's about the same size, if not maybe slightly bigger than the Skaha, but again, probably similar purposes really, just a larger, more food-focused knife, I suppose, more adept at cutting against boards as well, being that there is no flipper tab to sort of add an extra protrusion on this side. The Benchmade 940, similar size knife to the Skaha. So the Skaha is not a small knife at all, it's definitely in that mid to, yeah, probably just right in the middle of mid-sized knives, for sure. Got a paramilitary 2. That handle puts the overall length just a little bit over. It's a very large handled knife, the paramilitary 2. And then lastly, let's have a look at a knife that's made more for hard working. The Spyderco Shaman, which has G10 that feels actually very similar. If you want to know what this G10 feels like, about the same finish as the Shamans or the Shamans, or however you say it. But the Shaman is a much more stout kind of working knife, as you can see there, just much more kind of heavier built. But let's look at 4 more purpose similar knives and hopefully get over some talking points. So there are 3 competitor knives I have in my collection that I think do about the same kind of job or serve the same purpose as the Skaha. They're on the screen now, the Mantra 1, the Steel Wheel Modus, and the ZT-0470. And those are their respective prices in US dollars from Blade HQ, or in the case of the Skaha, from their website. But let's break down what I like more and less about all these other choices. So here's the Mantra 1 first. So what I like more about it, I do like the steel. I prefer M4 to S35VN, even though you can see here that the M4 does tarnish after repetitive use, for sure. But if you're a knife guy and you're taking care of your blades, I've never had too many issues with M4, and I really don't mind when it goes a bit, grungy looking, because it's just kind of part of the wear of the knife. It's totally fine. So I do like the knife steel a little bit more. I like the action a little bit less on the Mantra. These Mantras are not the best flippers. This one does go off every time, but it is nowhere near as snappy or as responsive as, frankly, any of these other ones here. So Spyderco's flippers have been a bit of a long road for them. And there is that. And of course, what I dislike most about the Mantra 1 is you can't get these anymore. In a really disappointing decision, at least for me, Spyderco discontinued the titanium M4 Mantras, and now they sell a much more generic seeming one in S30V and peel ply, sticky type carbon fiber on G10, and it really doesn't do much for me at all. And they've got because they're accommodating a compression lock now, they've got a bit more, even more of this one slightly maybe, but that's probably from my sharpening, even more of an exaggerated recurve, which is a bummer. The Steel Wheel Modus is about $40 US cheaper, so I guess that is definitely something to like more about this one. It's made in Italy for steel wheel. The blade steel in this one, M390, is kind of like S35VN, but about, if S35VN is a solid B in all attributes, this is about an A in all attributes. So it's a bit of an upgrade in about every kind of steel quality you can think of, except for maybe ease of sharpening. At any rate, it's a great steel. And the fact that it's cheaper is pretty compelling. Plus, I like the flipper in this one a bit more. It doesn't have the issue that I have with this one where when the knife is open, the flipper, like the sharp part of the flipper, points away or at least parallel to my index finger. So unless I ride my finger up onto it, which isn't going to happen, I don't get the same issue with a hot spot on my index finger from the flipper as I've got on that one. The G10 handle is very sort of similar, I guess, in materials-wise, it's pretty similar in the handle. So you've got just an exposed leaf being the liner lock, and then G10 handles. They're not as nicely done as the ones on the Skaha. They're not completely 3D milled or anything like that. They're just flat G10 with some radiusing around the outside. I think in general this is a bit of an uglier knife as well. Taste is everything, but I like the looks of this a lot less. And I also don't like the pocket clip as much either on the Steel Wheel Modus, but it is still a great EDC knife choice. Some great steel in a very compelling flipper package for sure. And then the ZT-0470, it's about $60 to $70 US more than the Skaha, but you get a couple of extra things. You get proper sort of expensive materials like titanium and carbon fiber in your handle. You get a CPM 20 CV blade, which is a steel that's about on par with the M390 in the steel wheel. This is one of Zero Tolerance's better EDC offerings in my opinion. The blade's actually ground fairly thin for a zero tolerance. It won't cut anywhere near as well as probably any of these other knives out of the box, but with a little bit of tweaking as I did, you can get a pretty resolute cutting machine out of it. ZT generally do seem to grind theirs for edge durability rather than edge longevity, so that's just what I've noticed. But that's the thing I like less about it. It's not as good a cutter as really any of these, but especially not these two here, and this is probably the best slicer out of all of them, the Mantra included, which is also a very good slicer. So you're kind of going a bit more upscale with this one here. The action's great, but probably only about as good as the Skaha. I keep going to say Three Rivers. I believe that's another smaller indie house. But yeah, the North Arm is probably the best action and the best slice out of all of them, thanks to its great detent and its very nice thinly ground blade. So yeah, those are the 4 more competitive options that I can think of out of my collection at the moment. But by all means, if you've got another that you could suggest, ask me in the comments and I'll field it as best I can. the main thing about these choices is that North Arm have a wait list, and these aren't easy to get, which I never love. Like, I am not a big fan of having to wait for knife purchases. I don't think this is so exceptional, as in so much more exceptional than any of these, that it is particularly worth waiting for and not buying a knife. If you need a knife, but then do any of us actually need this extra knife? Of course not. So if you're going to be buying this and waiting for a knife, it's not because you need one, is it? It's because you want this to add to your collection and use it occasionally. So I guess that's fine, but if you actually needed to get a pocket knife tomorrow, then unless you wanted to get like a rat tool to tide you over until you get this really premium one, any of these others would be fine. Speaking further on the blade, it's a really basic drop point shape, a really inoffensive pattern, and I do really enjoy how it works. I like the stamping of the blade as well. You know, some people don't like stamping because they feel it makes weaknesses, but then this isn't a hard use tool. If you're using it in a point where it snaps at the indentations, you've probably overused it anyway. So it shows you it's got North Arm, S35 VN, and then it's got made in British Columbia, BC. I had to double check that because I just assumed this was an American made knife, but it's actually a Canadian knife, which is really cool as well. You don't get too many Canadian knives, so that's awesome. I don't know why that's awesome, but it is. Especially if you're Canadian, you must be like, go team, good on us. Looking at the blade, you see they've ground it in a very interesting way. So they have gone and put like a very much stepped or staggered grind away design on here, and I would only assume that is done by leapfrogging the belt up, and I that's all I can think. I mean, I'd love to see this get made. It's a really, really interesting finish. Yeah, it's made of a stainless steel, so you don't have to worry too much about it rusting. I mean, often exposed surface areas, as this does, any sort of rough or mottled finish exposes extra bits of the surface to rust, but S35VN is a nice rust-free steel, and I certainly haven't noticed anything in my couple of weeks of using this thing. So that's cool as well. One interesting thing, and a very frequently asked question was, does it hoard gunk? So to test this, I cut some brie and then I rubbed some sawdust into this, left it for a day, and then just did what would be like a standard wipe down with a wet cloth. And then I looked at it under the microscope, and you'll see that these are like quite soft indentations. They're soft grooves, so they really don't keep anything. There's no sort of real corner in them for anything to really get stuck. And even cooler than that, they actually do seem to aid in some of the tasks that often flat grind knives fall down in. So what I did is I got this knife and I cut some cheese with it, and then I got a knife with a flat grind and a similar thickness, not the same but similar, being the front portion of an Endura, and I cut cheese with that. And this actually feels like, and I'm not sure if it's all in my head, but these may well help the material fall away from the blade surface and not get that stick that often full flats get when they're cutting through materials that have a bit of sort of give or doughiness in them. So very, very cool. There may actually be something to it that is more than just it looking really, really super cool. So that's another, I guess, feature and something that I found very, very nice about this knife. So there you go. Ergonomically speaking, well, there's an issue that I'll talk about later, but I do really like the handle as it's laid out. Spoilers, but if this flipper tab wasn't here, it'd be amazing in hand. It's nice 3D milled G10. It really does just form a nice straight shape for your fist to wrap around. So really, really well done. Excellent ergonomics. I really, really enjoy how it feels in the hand when I'm holding it back here. The pocket clip falls into your hand just fine as well, no issues with that. It's a very controllable knife. It will fit any hand shape, size or style really. My hands are on the larger size with the large size nitrile gloves. And absolutely no issues with how it fits or feels with me at all. There's a lanyard hole if that's the way your cookie crumbles. Not a big fan of lanyards myself. And there's nothing offensive about this hand at all. I did my rope cut test with this knife and it was absolutely fine. And my rope cut test, I hold it in a weird way. I hold it like this, which is not a usual really way of holding a knife, except unless you're doing a job like that, and did absolutely fine. So excellent, well played, great job. S35VN is a compelling blade steel for a knife that is under $200 in my opinion, even still, especially when you get it made by a small batch maker like this in Canada. So often you would see knives of this sort of origin be using still things like 154cm, even VG10, D2, things like that. So it's a good powdered stainless steel. It's definitely the benchmark, or like the baseline of steels now. It's it's that good steel that maybe VG10 was 15 years ago. So absolutely no problems at all with it. But to be absolutely clear, let's take the pristine factory edge over to the knife lab and see how it goes. Alrighty, so this is part of the review where I test the S35VN steel on its pristine factory edge. This is one of the first things I usually do with a knife because A, it means that the edge starts nice and sharp, because unless it's a really bad factory edge, they can usually slice paper really well from the box, and it gives you an idea of, if you were to buy this knife, how long it might be until we have to resharpen it, or at least if you think about rope cuts, how many approximate rope cuts your EDC use would be over like a month. I would estimate that this rope's pretty nasty and fibrous. I'd say anything over 100 cuts is probably a fair bit of EDC use before you lose your sort of absolute, paper slicing sharpness. So the factory grind on this one is very thin behind the edge, and it's also, it's quite a thin little apex there too, but I think that's owing to the thinness behind the edge and also the general blade stock. I don't actually know the angles. I wouldn't really hazard a guess either. I'd say it's under 20. It's probably about 18 or so. Just eyeballing it though. So we're going to see how much twisted sisal rope it cuts before it no longer slices into a held piece of paper. If you want to know more about this test, you can watch the hundreds of tests I've done exactly like this and get a rough idea of where this factory edge in S35VN might fit amongst a whole bunch of other edges and steels. Alrighty, so 260 before it no longer slices a whole sheet of paper, it starts to tear in about the part that I was using. So I usually try and use like the forward sort of 1.5 inches or so of most blades. And yeah, now it is no longer, super paper slicing sharp. Still a very decent working edge though, due to the thinness behind it. You'll be able to push this through a lot of cheese, a lot of envelopes, a lot of cardboard before you actually need to resharpen it even still. So really good result on the S35VN, 260 cuts for a factory edge. That's pretty darn good. It's just showing that this is a very well ground factory edge. Looking at it up close, yeah, you can sort of see where it has gradually flattened out. There's a little bit of silver along the edge there. I'll see if I can do a little zoom in on that because that's interesting. At any rate, that's the edge from the factory and how much rope it cuts. Couple of little post notes about the knife after the rope cutting test. Ergonomically, this was a pretty good grip, like the way that I hold it while I do my rope cutting tests. There's another thing I'll talk about later with the general handle and the standard use ergonomics, but we'll get to that. One thing I did notice is the knife now has a bit of a sound. Still not stiff or anything. It still drops sharp, but it's got a little bit of grit in there or something now. Probably maybe a little piece of rope or something has gotten in there, and now it's just less silent. And also it's now no longer centered, so whether or not it's just how it works, working with the knife, maybe I just need to tighten the pivot up, we will see. How does she eat when she doesn't have a face? Right, so the action is excellent. It's a really strong detent, and that is how the action is the way it is. Very hard to open this knife without it fully coming to an open, because the detent is quite tough and it launches past once you overcome it. Absolutely. And it's why the action is excellent, as well as with its very smooth bearing system too. This is a drop shutting knife, no worries at all. But conversely to that, this has one of the, and I'm going to point this out because this is a very hyped knife, and I think a lot of people will buy this expecting EDC perfection, because that is really what they are admirably going for. They sort of they look to be taking all the stuff that us knife nerds complain about: thin grinds, wire clips, all the stuff that we're always asking for, nice unlined G10 handles, keeping it lightweight, all that good stuff. Great action, absolutely, but the cost is this flipper tab. It's no damn good. It is very, this detent is very strong, so you can't just casually activate it. And you can probably hear, I'm actually running my finger not lightly across that flipper tab. You actually have to properly sink into it and launch it, so you're not going to accidentally launch your knife open, and that's good, I guess. But to give you the purchase that they feel you need, they have put some rather sharp jimping placed at a very strange angle. There is no flat spot on this tab. The reason the Modus, in my opinion, has a better flipper tab than this knife here is that you're using this flat part to do the predominant flipping, and then you've got a tiny bit of, maybe 2 or 3 jimps there to maybe catch on if you miss. And yeah, it's a good compromise. And also, they are pointing straight away from the blade, or from the parallel line here, and that's kind of what you need, because then you get to this other problem I have with this knife. When it is opened, my index finger rests against these inward pointing jimps while I use it, and so you can see, and this is the benefit of doing a proper long-term review where you cut lots and lots of things with a knife. You see here there is a callus on my finger there, and that is from using this knife repeatedly and it just getting a little bit of a blister and eventually, because it's been a couple of weeks, working up a callus there, like right there on my finger. Yeah, this is all callus from doing my cut test. This is different callus, trust me. This is just from it resting up against that tab there. And because this is just how the knife falls into the hand. It's very, very comfortable in the hand, like when you're not leaning up against that tab. Great job. But the flipper tab undermines a lot of those good ergonomic strides. And I thought I'd definitely have to bring it up, because it is something that's actually, it would probably, this is a lent knife by a friend. That would stop me from buying this knife. I wouldn't buy this knife, even though it is such a good deal on paper. It's a small batch made knife for under $200 US, with everything else in it being excellent. That's annoying enough to me because it does affect the every time use of the knife. So it's probably something that I would not buy it for. So I would just definitely suggest you could, if you wanted to buy this, see how you go, of course, but you may want to get some sandpaper, knock this down a bit. It's not my knife, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, something I definitely thought I have to point out, just in case this seemed like it was going to be a perfect review, because it really isn't. It's definitely an issue. And if I was doing Nick's good, great, bad, ugly, it would be in the ugly, not even just in the bad. So there you go. That's the one point of conflict I have with this otherwise excellent blade. Alrighty, so that's my review of the Skaha. Look, it's an excellent knife. For the cost you pay for something that is, you know, small batch made, it's a really good deal. I don't know about the flipper tab. I talked to some other reviewers and they didn't seem to have the same response as I did to it, so it might just be my hand, how I hold the knife, whatever. I do feel like it is, you know, quite an angle that is prone to do that though, so just something to consider, I guess. If you were to buy one of these, you could probably have no worries just you know, polishing them down just a little bit, those jimps, and should have a little bit more luck than I do. But everything else about the knife is great. It is really quite refined, and they're definitely going for that sort of EDC sweet spot, like a great knife that pretty much anyone could carry and enjoy, and it does all the actual knife stuff really, really well too. So that is my review of the Skaha. It's a positive one, absolutely, just that one little issue. So I'll see you all in the next video, guys. Goodbye.